And hello, everybody. Welcome to Trusty Mercantile, and you're joining us this evening for tonight's edition of DuoDive. And as part of the other half of the duo on our DuoDives, we've got Katie from Vintage and Vinyl. So thanks for joining us, Katie.
Absolutely, Patrick. I'm so excited about this evening and getting a chance to share my miniature hats along with some of my grown-up hats.
Absolutely. It's the way the DuoDives and to a certain extent the Triptychs work. Katie and I work together to try and schedule different guests and different topics, and we try and keep things interesting and have variety. And every once in a while, there again ends up being a scheduling problem that a guest has to change or is unavailable. So we have in our back pockets some secondary options available for DuoDives. And Katie and I both collect so much that we will probably never run out. Yeah, I knock wood. But we probably will never run out of secondary topics to have available. And tonight, that topic, since I was hosting, I get to interview Katie. And we chose to interview, as Katie said, I'm interviewing Katie about her miniature hat collection. So we all know Katie's hats. I've even started wearing hats when I'm on Katie's channel. But tonight, since we're talking hats, I pulled out one of mine, and Katie helped me identify what type of hat I have. So we might get into that. But we are talking specifically tonight about little hats. They're like little miniature hats, and you might consider them salesman samples, but Katie will talk a little bit about what more likely they are. But before we get into that, we'll say some quick hellos to those who have joined us in the chat. So we've got Angela coming in from Dear Angela's Vintage, Tim coming in from the Great White North, and Sam coming in from almost as far white north in New England. Carrie pulling up the south, coming out of Texas. Pam coming also in from the south. Now hopefully keeping things warmer down there since we're a little chilly up here. Chilly in the Chicagoland area with Brian. Vinny, also mid-Atlantic, probably getting a little chill there too. Debbie, knowing what the cold is like in Chicagoland area. And then we got Bren, who's just laughing at all of us.
In the beautiful Hawaii
is warm. So, I don't know what cold is in Hawaii, like what, 60? So I don't know how cold it gets in Hawaii, but welcome Bren from I Heart Old Things. And Vintage and Vino is joining us, probably either Tim or Jerry, probably Jerry. Amy's here. Tiger coming in from Southwest. Let's see. Rebecca coming in from far Northeast, coming in from Maine. And let's see, I think I might have caught everyone. Oh, we've got Sherry, and then another frigid northerner. We've got our Michigander coming in. We've got Jerry from My Flea Market Treasures. Val is saying hello. Jean Marie. And let's see, I'm always afraid I'm going to miss somebody as it keeps jumping. But I think I caught everyone. If I missed you, I do apologize. But thanks everyone for joining in. And hopefully, most of the names I said, I think most of them are familiar to us as a group and to you specifically. So I have a feeling we're going to have a nice turnout tonight, specifically because we're talking about Katie and hats. And Katie and hats, brooches go together with Katie as well. So we got a hashtag Bring Back the Brooch. We now have a collaboration hashtag Bring Back the Clear Glass in 2022 collab, which I'm sorry is like the longest hashtag ever.
It is.
But we got Katie's like bringing up 2 hashtags, and now she's going to have to come up with something about the hats.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
we are. What do we have as our brooch today before we get into our hats?
So we have a fun little poodle wearing a top hat, and I just thought he was so fun. I don't actually have any hat per se brooches, but this little guy wearing the top hat will do the trick for tonight. So he's
there you go. He works, a little top hat wearing animal. I am wearing my, let's see, I've got my trunk down elephant brooch as my hat pin tonight. So I'm not really into brooches, but I'll turn them into hat pins.
Down.
Yep, thumbs up for trunk down. So we've got hashtags coming all over the place. So tonight we are talking about, if you didn't see some of the promotions in Instagram and on YouTube, you might have missed a couple of the photographs that Katie had been sharing and that we were showing of exactly what we're talking about. So we were trying to come up with a term. So we're going to start with, we're just going to call them miniature hats. They're vintage miniature hats. Could be considered salesman samples. But before we get into how or why you started collecting them, why don't you show us what it is that you collect, and then we'll kind of backtrack and let people, once they know what we're talking about, we can kind of fill in the gaps of how the collection started. So what is it that you collect?
Well, that is a great question, Patrick. So I actually have a whole collection of these small little hat boxes with little tiny hats. Some are plastic, some are felt. And I just think that these are so fantastic. So what these are actually gift cards. Now, a lot of people online, when you see these, don't know what these are. And so they immediately think salesman sample, which makes sense because they're small and they're little. And while they could be salesman samples, the more likely option is that they are gift cards. And I can show why they are gift cards later on in the show. But for one example here, this Dobbs box actually has a 4. So you would write the person's name on it. You could get these little hat boxes at any of the stores that sold hats, and then you would give this as a gift. And the person can go back to the hat store and trade them in for a real life-size hat. So there's all different kinds of styles of hats that come in these hat boxes. They are very little and adorable. I've even seen these listed as dollhouse furniture pieces, which is not really the case either. In fact, I found
that has to be a pretty big dollhouse to scale that.
Big dollhouse.
So if there were gift cards, so were they trying to be miniaturized versions? Like, is that Dobbs hat box that you showed, would that have been the same shape and same artwork that was on a full-sized Dobbs hat box, or was there something specific for the gift cards?
That is a great question. And no, this is actually like a mini example of a real Dobbs box. Dobbs has a really cool shaped box for all of their hats. I don't actually have one to show you. I've never found one in the wild because the hat boxes alone, by the way, not just for these miniature hats, but for the bigger examples, can do really well online because hat collectors like their hat boxes. So this is an actual like scale example of one of the bigger hat boxes that they would have sold. I like this kind of octagonal shape. I think it's cool. And of course, it says on the front, it's the Dobbs. Now, there's also other examples online. This is not Dobbs, but look at this photograph here. It's the Champ. It's a gift. That's a hat. And it says, to Dad from Mary and Cap, I do believe. And then I even found advertisements that advertise that these are, in fact, little gift cards. So this advertisement that I have here is from 1936. This came out of a Inquirer magazine. This is for Knox hats. Knox made very good hats. And there it is. The Knox gift certificate comes in a miniature hat box.
No, it comes in a sprightly miniature hat box. We cannot forget sprightly.
Yeah, sprightly is a fun word. Trying to read this backwards is a little hard.
So the Knox gift certificate comes in a sprightly miniature hat box. Ask any Knox dealer in your city about it today. So now that one shows kind of like a piece of paper that goes with the box. Because what you've got me thrown, so we back up a step. I first heard about these far later than Katie did, but I first heard about these as I was shopping. I don't remember where I was, but I was in an antique mall, and I came across a little white box. I can't remember the brand, but it was a little white hat box, and it had there it is, and it had 2 hats in it. And I've never seen anything like that before. I'm like, oh my God, this has got Katie written all over it. So I picked it up and sent it to her for a gift. And then she's like, oh my God, this will be great in my collection. I'm like, you collect these things? What are they? So she had to kind of back me up a little bit to tell me, yes, that there is a history on these. And she already had this as a collection. Now she's showing, like, the one that I got happened to have 2 different hats in it. And they're very different styles because that one's kind of like a hard plastic. And the other one is more like a felted, like, it's still not felt, but it's not the same hard plastic. Is that felt on it, or it's just a little bit thinner plastic?
So it's a plastic base, but yes, it's been felted on.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that one probably looks, I think what you were telling me, that one probably looks a little more like a traditional Knox hat, since that's what the box was. And the other one wasn't, it's more like a cowboy hat, which I don't know if Knox did that. And so she was kind of like explaining, and because I thought the same thing as a lot of people, I thought they were salesman samples. So of course, being the huckster, I thought it was just a perfect gift. And then she's like, no, it's not. And so they are, that they are actually these gift cards. So then that one, my question is, a gift card, how would you trade it in? Like, would you get this cool little hat and then you had to give it away? So I'm wondering, like, how did these hats stay in collections? Did people say, "Oh, I got you this great gift card, but you can't turn it in because I think it's too cute. We're going to keep it."
Well, as far as I know, you took these to the store and then they would fit you for a real hat. And basically, the person had already purchased or paid for the price of a hat. Now, I'm assuming, and I don't 100% know this, I'm assuming the style of hat you got inside the box would indicate what hat you were going to buy, because many hat companies had tons of different lines of hats. Stetson being one of them. It is almost near impossible to date a vintage Stetson hat because there are so many different lines, and there are tons of forums online with collectors that are always talking about how confusing it is because they made so many different styles. But of course, if you're going to buy a hat that is, say, a just regular wool felt hat, well, that's not going to be as expensive as buying the very best hat you can buy, which is a beaver fur hat. So obviously, I'm assuming, and I don't know this because there's not much information on these online, is that the type of hat that you would buy or select from one of these little boxes would indicate the style or type of hat that you're going to trade it in for in the store when you went there. Because obviously, certain hats are going to be more expensive than others, depending on what line that you're actually buying the hat from. So that's what these are. I don't know if there was actually a paper gift certificate like this ad shows that came with it, but I do know that a lot of them just had the mini hats from other advertisements that I've seen online. Now, Knox, they might have done things a little bit differently than other companies would have done them. I know in the 1950s that Adam Hats really got into doing these miniature boxes. In fact, I showed an Adams at the beginning of the show, this one here. And Adams did a lot of things, but they were sold in 1955 to Mills Brothers, I believe. And that's when they started doing specifically these hat boxes. So for Adam Hats, I do know in 1955, you'll start seeing these. But based on other advertisements I've seen, I think that these started in 1930 and went probably through the 1960s or so. That would be my guess on the dates on these. And again, like I said, there's a lot of confusion on what these are and what they're used for. And I wish I knew more about actually how they were used. There's just not a lot of information online. There's tons of information on hats. If you want to get into collecting vintage hats, there are forums upon forums with really enthusiastic collectors waiting to help you with all of their knowledge.
And I think this is a great example of where we like to do these to educate everyone as much as we can. But at no point is any one person the most knowledgeable in anything. So hive mind, join together. If you come across ads, if you come across examples of these, or salesman information and training programs that talk about these, those are the missing pieces of the puzzles that we always need, because I'm just fascinated by the idea that somebody would get this hat as a gift, which I think is a brilliant marketing idea, I will say.
Yeah, totally.
But you would have to give the hat back in order to trade it in. Otherwise, how do you keep from getting like 5 hats off of the one gift card? But I could totally see people saying, well, wait, I like this. I like the hat. I like the box, that they'd want to keep it. So I think the idea that there would be a piece of paper that would have gone with it and that that's what you trade in, that to me makes a lot of sense. But like you said, there's advertisers that don't seem to indicate that. So we still have to try and, piece some of that together. But you have several different variations. And just what you said, you've got them across many decades. One of the questions that came in was from Pamela. She's asking, in total, how many do you actually have of these in your collection?
Great question, Pam. So I have this Adams hat box here. I have 2 examples of the Stetson hat box. This one is red and this one is black. So right now that's 3. I have the Dobbs. Now there's different versions of the Dobbs that I would still like to add to my collection, but that makes 4. And then I have the Knox hat, which makes 5. Now, technically, you could say I have 6. But this next one actually isn't a hat box. Well, it is a hat box, but it's not a gift box. This is a larger version of the Stetson box that you just saw. So you can see there's a big difference in size. But this one actually doesn't hold a gift certificate. It actually holds a little miniature hat that is a brush. And this brush would have been used to clean your hat. So this is a little cleaning kit that you could have bought in Stetson stores. And I think this is pretty fabulous. So technically I have 6, but more to be specific with the actual gift cards, 5.
Now the hat brush box, so you said that one was metal. So if you come across the metal box, is that always then going to be tied? Do you know of any examples where the metal one was used as a gift card box as well?
No, I have not seen any of the metal ones actually used as gift card box. Doesn't mean that they didn't do it. Stetson is the only one I have seen that has these little metal boxes. Doesn't mean that one won't come up for sale for another company, but typically these would have had a brush inside to clean your hats, because that is very important for any type of hat to keep dust and debris off of it. So cleaning it with one of these is fantastic. And then there's a little cleaning cloth. I don't know if this would have been original, because I'm not sure how you would have cleaned your hat with this. More so, these are what you use to clean your hat. So as far as I know, Stetson just did the metal ones. But a lot of times you find these online and they have a miniature hat inside, because people find things that really don't go together and they put them together, you know. So you'll find these often like that. Same with these hats, just like Patrick was talking about, these boxes. You'll find them where there's like multiple hats inside one. And I don't know if that meant that the person that owned these at one point got a gift certificate for 2 hats, or someone just found these and put them with, you know, you really never could trace that down. This particular style, I believe, is actually, yes, it's marked Stetson on the inside. So this one doesn't go with the Knox. This one more likely would have gone with this particular box. Stetson, you know, they were known for actually kind of creating the whole idea of cowboy hats in general. So Knox probably wouldn't have had that in their particular hat boxes. They were known more for the stylish upper class hats, like Hamburgs, Fedoras, that kind of thing. Stetson did a lot of the cowboy hats.
And this is running into a question, I think, I just lost it, but I want to say Daniel had asked, where are you finding these? I will speak from the one that I found was, I did find it in the wild, but it would not be a surprise to me because of the style of booth that I found it in. It was at an antique mall, but it seemed to be one that was probably specializing more in house closeouts. So it's entirely possible the person had a collection of quote unquote these, and it included the hat box, the red hat, and then the Stetson hat, and then the reseller just, you know, put them all into one batch, figuring whoever wanted to buy the box would also buy the hats. So that was at an antique mall. So you're mentioning online. Where are you typically finding these? Have you ever found them in the wild, thrift stores, antique shops, anything like that?
I've never actually found one in the wild. So Tim found a bunch of them for me in the wild. Patrick found some in the wild for me. But the ones that I've been buying have primarily been online. That's where you're going to see the most of them. I'm sure some of them are sitting in antique stores. And again, people don't know what they are. But I found my first one, which was this one, online. So I started collecting these actually because I had a Dobbs hat that is actually not with me today. It is being cleaned. So I'm having it specially cleaned and the hat band repaired. So it is at the hat shop here in town getting all spiffied up. But that hat was my Papa's hat. And I was so excited to get that hat after he passed away. And I wore it all the time. And I haven't worn it in a while because it's being cleaned. But I fell in love with the fact that it was a Dobbs, and Dobbs makes very good hats. And so I started doing research on hats and Dobbs hats in particularly. And then I went online and I was looking for vintage Dobbs hats. It became a whole search, and I found this under Dobbs hats online, and I was fascinated by it. I needed to know what it was, and I had to have it in my collection. So I picked this guy up online for about $25. It came with mini hats inside, and I just thought it was the coolest thing. And then I found that Knox advertisement from 1930, and I was like, oh, that's what these are. These are gift cards. And then I started finding more of them online, but listed primarily as salesman samples. So then I started doing more research, and it really did appear to me like these were gift cards. And I thought they were the coolest thing. And I have a collection of hats, so I had to have a collection of these.
Absolutely. And that's what brings us here tonight. So when you find them online, it's not, so you found your first one because you were looking for the actual brand. But as we've determined, except for the exception of that hard plastic Stetson one, they're not marked. So do you ever come across just the hats, just the miniature hats without the boxes? Curious what terms, other than salesman sample, what terms people are using to sell them if you don't know the brand.
That is a good point, Patrick. Yes, I do see them all the time online without the box. Sometimes I just see the box. Sometimes I just see the hat. But if you just type in like Fedora hat, like vintage Fedora hat, vintage Hamburg hat, and I can cover the styles of hats here in just a minute, but that is what you're going to kind of find them under. So if you're looking for one of them, like you have a box and you want a hat to go with it, that's probably a pretty good search term. You can also, I see people, again, we talked about this at the beginning of the show, but I don't think that these at all would be the right scale for dollhouses, but for some reason, people have them sometimes listed under miniature dollhouse furniture. There's a lady on, I want to say it's like Poshmark or Mercari, one of those websites that actually sells dollhouse furniture. That is her whole business. And she has a bunch of these up for sale right now, listed as mini dollhouse furniture pieces. And I kind of thought that was a little crazy, but I thought, that's a really good price for these. So I might have to go back and pick a few of them up. So you'll find them separated. And again, like I said, I wish I knew that, the hat that you're getting inside, unless they're marked Stetson, which sometimes the plastic ones have a molded mark for Stetson or some of the other hat companies. It's really hard to know if you're getting an actual hat that would have come originally with the box.
Now, Brian is asking a question that I think is actually fascinating. As we, like you said, we may talk a little bit about the styles. I am not familiar with Knox or Dobbs or Adam. Did they also make women's hats? And would there have been types of hats that they could have traded as gift cards for ladies?
That is a good question. I'm sure that there were. I don't 100% know. I've never seen any. Fedoras were traditionally a woman's hat. And then in 1920, they became a man's hat, and it really took off.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
You had big people wearing fedoras. So, they became really, really popular in the late 1940s, early 1950s, because you had your singers like Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra wearing fedoras. And then you had different actors like Cary Grant and Humphrey Beauregard that was wearing those types of hats. So they really made them popular. And fedoras originally were not actually an expensive hat. They were more the everyday person's hat, because bowlers and Hamburgs were the elegant hat. They were the hat of choice. So they kind of distinguished you as a more high scale person in society than if you just wore a fedora. But then once the late 40s, early 50s rolled around, they kind of became the everyday person's hat. They really were popular, and men all over the place wore them. And Hamburgs and all of those other hats started phasing out a little bit, because the fedora was a little bit more relaxed and it was more classic, and it was really made cool by a lot of the actors at the time.
So which one of the you said the ad was probably from the 30s, but from the samples that you have, which are probably the earliest? Because a couple of them looked very similar, and I would colloquially call them fedoras, but I'm not sure I know the difference. So where are the earliest styles that you have?
These hat boxes here feature some different hats. So let me show you this miniature hat. Now, this probably would have been more of a fedora style, but given the way that this hat band is, this might go back to your question, Brian, is this might have been more of a lady's hat. Just given the way the hat band is, it screams that way to me, but it could be a men's hat. But traditionally with this style of hat, the wide brim, the pinch front and the top, to me, that is a fedora. And then you have your Hamburg hat here. Hamburgs are more round. They have the center indent going around the top here. Now, Hamburgs are a very interesting style of hat, because these were actually invented in the late 1800s. And Hamburgs are a German hunting hat. And so they were actually made popular by King Edward VII after his trip to Germany. He had a hunting trip. He came back and they became very, very stylish and very popular. And of course, they were a more elevated hat. Your Hamburg, your bowler hat, those are the types of hats that you would have worn if you had a lot of money. So here's your bowler style of hat. And then you've got your Hamburg down here. So that is really a cool little image that I have of all the different types of hats. You have trilbies, which became really popular in the 1960s. That's the hat Patrick's wearing. So it's got a shorter brim. Yep, there it is, shorter brim in the back. And it kind of flares down in the front. And it's got a little bit more shape to the top of the crown. So that's what I would call a trilby hat. And then you have all different styles of other hats that I don't actually have to show you today. I don't have a pork pie hat because I don't look particularly good in pork pies. You have a pork pie hat. You have top hats. Top hats were first invented in the 1700s, and they were made out of beaver fur, which is, of course, the best hat you can buy. If you're going to buy a style of hat, they don't really make beaver fur hats anymore unless you're going to pay a whole bunch of money. But early hats would have beaver fur, and then you would get into rabbit fur, which is like the second best. And then the third best, which is what I'm wearing and most common, is just your wool felt, which is basically sheep wool that's been woven and twined together until it kind of sticks and forms into a shape. So you've got all different fun styles of hats.
Now your brim is curved up all the way around. Is that still considered a fedora, or is your brim flexible?
Yeah, so this is still considered a fedora, this hat here. Fedoras, you can move the brim. So this is what they would call a snap brim fedora. So see how it snaps into place? I can kind of make it move how I want it to go. And then you have different types of fedoras. This one has a fixed crown. That's what I would call it at the top. So I can't really change its shape, but let me show you an awesome hat. This is a vintage Stetson hat. And this one is a fedora as well. It's got the snap brim in the front, but it's got more of a moldable pinch front crown. So I can kind of mold this and shape it how I want it to be, which is really fantastic. So there are different types of hats within the different styles. So this is a vintage Stetson hat. Stetson hats, like I said, are very hard to date, but this one's probably from the 1980s, I would guess, just based on its liner. And in 1980, Stetson hats really became popular again because of the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark. It came out in 1981, and everybody wanted a cowboy style Stetson hat. And Stetson had to really work overtime to produce more hats. But that wasn't the case through the 70s. Hats kind of fell out of style a little bit in the 70s. And now hats are becoming cooler again. But, there's not really a need for hats other than fashion. If you think about history of hats, the reason people originally wore hats was for protection from the elements outside and to show social status. And we don't really need that now. It's more of a fashionable thing. But this is a very cool vintage Stetson hat. So this is like the growing up version of my miniature Stetson hat. I also have this Stetson hat, which is one of my favorites. This one's probably from the 1950s. It's got the candy cane lining on the inside.
Oh, fun.
So I love the silk lining. Good quality hats will always have a silk lining. On the inside, they'll have a really nice sweatband, which is what this is called. This is made out of a premium rabbit's fur. So both of my Stetson hats are really fantastic quality here because they've got that rabbit's fur. And with Stetson, when you're dating Stetson hats, I said it's pretty hard, but many people see the inside of Stetson's hats and they see the sovereign mark and people think, oh, that's the name of the hat. Well, actually, it's not. That just shows its quality. So anytime you see the word sovereign in Stetson hats, it actually means that it's the rabbit felt that was used to make this hat. The highest quality in Stetson hats would be a pinnacle hat, which was made from beaver. And then you have the royal and deluxe lines, which basically were, again, probably some sort of rabbit felt or rabbit fur, which is really, really good for hats. So this is a traditional style fedora. You've got the pinch front, so you can kind of shape it how you want it. It's got the snap brim. Now this brim is interesting because I want to point out the different styles of brims. And yes, I got Louis hair all over this hat. That's where I need the little hat brush. But this is actually a sewn brim. So you can see the edge here. This is flipped up and then stitched. So you've got the stitched brim, but there are other types of brims in hats. So you have a ribbon brim where this is actually finished with a ribbon. This is a very good quality method of construction because it keeps the brim from wearing out over the time. And then you have a raw edged brim, which this is just not finished, but this is the traditional style for classic fedoras back in the 50s, is this raw edge brim with the big grosgrain ribbon band going around the outside, and then the pinch front top. Now, these last two hats I showed are not vintage, but they just kind of show some of the styles in which the brims are designed. So that's kind of a little history of different hats. And I wanted to share a little bit about the Stetson hats again, because I think they're really marvelous. Stetson had a just fascinating history because Stetson was founded in 1865. And it was John B. Stetson that actually founded the Stetson Company. And he only had $100 to his name. He was really ill and he moved out west looking for gold like everybody else. And that dry air really made him feel better, cleared his lungs. And then when he came back, he started Stetson hats and it really, really took off. It was a big deal because everybody moving out west wanted a Stetson hat. And he had been out west, so he knew how harsh that sun is and the conditions were. So he made these wide brim hats that became really popular and of course really set the whole cowboy hat movement into being. And by 1906, they were making 2 million hats. So Stetson has a very rich history. Now in 2004, I think it was, they moved to Texas. So they had several different factories. And what's kind of interesting about Stetson hats at the time in the 1800s when he had founded Stetson hats, most hat companies were sending their hat people to actually make the hats. They would get them sort of by travel. So they were people that would just kind of float into town, work a little while, and then move on to another hat manufacturer to make hats. But Stetson wanted a reliable workforce. He wanted people that would be there to produce quality hats and to really build a whole manufacturing line and factory. So what he did, which was revolutionary at the time, is he actually had people coming in and built a dentist office, a doctor's office. He built all kinds of things in the actual original Stetson hat factory. And that way people could live and work. He even training programs for immigrants coming in so they could learn the area and learn English and all kinds of amazing things. He invented stocks and bonds for his company and had people be able to actually stay. And so he created a long line of really happy workers, which I think is pretty cool. So it was an interesting time in hat manufacturing for Stetson. And Stetson is still being made today. They still make Stetson hats. Unfortunately, as people will tell you in the hat collecting world, their quality has gone down. They are still good hats, but they are not like they were back in the day.
Are they still made in the United States? Are they still made in Texas?
Yeah, as far as I know, they're still made in Texas. But that's why I think when you find some of these vintage Stetson pieces, they're just really cool because they go back to that really good quality time when hats were being made and people were actually wearing hats, and they were important to a whole, not only fashion time period, but for practicality purposes too.
That's fantastic. So now, as like you said, so Stetson, I think Stetsons are still considered expensive hats,
Yeah.
Even the contemporary ones. At what point this kind of circles back to what we were talking about with the gift cards, but you mentioned the silk lining. You talked about the sovereign. Are all of those types of levels still available today? Like, do they still make rabbit fur hats and beaver fur hats, or is that simplified down?
That is a good question, Patrick. I don't believe they make beaver anymore. That is a kind of a dying art. It's harder to come by, and I'm sure with all of the protection around animals nowadays, you're not finding hats like that. Rabbit fur, I do believe, is still being made. Of course, you're going to pay up for hats like that. Stetson still makes good quality hats. They're more fashion forward now. But they're expensive. If you go to Macy's, I was looking at some Stetson hats in Macy's when I was in New York, and I want to say that they were $150 a hat.
Wow.
For a good hat, you're going to pay up for quality. And the hat I'm wearing is not vintage. A lot of people are going to ask about it. It's this Bruno Capello brand, which I like. Not sponsored by them, but they make good quality hats for under $100, which is pretty amazing since they do have like a silk lining. And these are not rabbit fur like some of my vintage hats, but these do have a really nice fur felt lining. So they're good quality and they last. I've got a couple of other examples of hats. So this is a vintage Dobbs hat, not my grandpa's hat. That one, like I said, I can't wait to get it back from the cleaning place. They're doing an amazing job. But this is actually not fur like some of the other hats I've shown. This is more of a fabric, a woven material. So this is not too vintage. I wouldn't consider this like 1950s or anything. This is probably more 1970s or 80s, I would guess, because it has this particular symbol. Dobbs hats are actually a little bit easier to date, which might help you in turn date the hat boxes as well. Because these Dobbs hats were marked with the address of where they were sold. And there were several different, a linen hat. That's a perfect example or term rather. You can date Dobbs hats by the marking on the inside. So this just has the plain Dobbs logo. Earlier Dobbs would have had this logo or like a lion logo. And you can date them because the Dobbs hats, and like this hat doesn't have it on the inside, but the Dobbs hats will have like a little lion logo, and then they will say the address of where they were on Fifth Avenue. And of course, Dobbs expanded and moved. So they started in 1908, and then in 1915 they changed. So they added another location on, and then they added a third location in 1917. So actually on the hats, in the hat band here, you can date a Dobbs because it will have a different logo. And then with the tag on the inside, it will tell you what address. So some of your earlier hats are going to be 242 Fifth Avenue. Your later hats from 1917 to 19 is going to be 244 and 620 Fifth Avenue, because that's when they had the two locations. And then in 1930 through 1940s, you're going to have the Hat Corporation of America logo also added into the Dobbs. So this is how I know this is a later Dobbs hat. And all hats, for the most part, will have a logo on the inside of the hat manufacturer. They'll have some sort of a tag, and then they'll have a tag in the back, which tells you the hat size. Now, sometimes these are taken off, but I am a 7 1/8 in hats, which is a medium size in hats. And if you look at these miniature hats, it's interesting because they don't actually have any of the sizing on the inside because, well, they're miniature hats, so you can't really wear these. But your bigger, larger examples will actually have those on the inside of the hats.
Now, before you put that one away, when you were holding up the bottom, and maybe it was just because it's more obvious because it's more of a fabric, the brim looks like there's stitching all the way around it, and the one you're wearing, I don't see anything like that. So is that more based on the type of fabric, or is that another style of a hat?
That's a good question, Patrick. Most hats will not have that other stitching other than just a stitched brim, which is how they do this little fold over construction. So this hat is more of a summery hat. So when you get into summery hats, this traditionally, because of its warmth, would be more of a winter hat. Of course, the color screams summer, and I wear these types of hats all year round, and I'm not bothered. But traditionally, if you're going to have winter and summer hats, this is more of a summer hat. And so sometimes with these straw hats or these linen hats, you'll see more of the stitch work inside, and that's just probably kind of how it is constructed with the linen. But this would be more of like a summery fedora to wear because it's lightweight. You can see it doesn't have the hot silk lining. It's just
Okay.
a nice
Michelle's commenting that the
linen.
stitching
Yeah.
could also stiffen the fabric.
It could as well. Yeah, because this is a pretty, I mean, linen is a pretty thin material anyway, so that probably does help with the construction of the hat. I don't know a ton about the construction of hats other than the different styles of brims and crowns and that kind of thing. But if you want to watch a really interesting video, I'll send Patrick the link. There's a gentleman that I found that makes custom hats for stars, and they're 2,000 or 3,000 each, which is fascinating. But he actually makes them from scratch, and there's a whole YouTube video on it. It's really, really interesting. And I can't say that I can explain all of the technical details to you, but I'll make sure to have it linked in the description box.
Excellent. Now, you said something that it made me kind of wonder. All of mine are contemporary, so I've got nothing that I can look at for anything for vintage. I mean, and this is straw or whatever equivalent of straw. But you had mentioned about the silk lining, that the silk lining would usually be a higher quality hat. But if you're dealing with a summer hat, I would think a silk lining would make it really hot. So can you still have a high quality summer weight hat? Would it still have a silk lining, or would they be made differently?
They would be made differently. You would not have a
Okay.
silk lining traditionally in a summer hat. And summer hats can still be really well made, like Dobbs, because you know, you think about your vintage hat companies, Dobbs, Kavanaugh, Knox, they were making some of the best quality hats out there. And so you're going to find good quality hats with a good quality, solid construction method, because it's all about that construction method, that don't have the silk lining. Because yes, in the summer, silk lining is really, really hot.
Yeah.
It can get a lot. And I want to talk a little bit about Adam hats, because we've talked about some of the really high quality hats. But Adam was a really interesting hat company that was founded in 1924 by Elias Lutwig. And they made budget hats. Now, this is what I find really interesting about the hat world. And I do actually have a grown-up example of an Adam hat. So they made some really good, pretty good quality, I should say, budget-friendly hats. And in 1940 and 1950, they really became popular because they were a sponsor of a radio broadcast for boxing matches at Madison Square Garden. And they advertised like crazy. I mean, Adam spent so much money on advertising. They even had little giveaways. If you ever see an Adam Hat match container or little matchstick booklet, those were actually used as giveaways. So you would get that, and then you could enter a contest to try to win a free Adams hat, which I think is really cool. So they marketed themselves as sort of the everyday budget-friendly hat. And I have a cool advertisement from Adams Hats here that says, "To the man who can pay $12 for a hat but doesn't want to." So their hats were only $7.50 when this ad came out in 1940. And isn't that cool? I love the history of Adam hats, but this hat is still surprisingly pretty well made. This does have a silk lining, but they didn't use silk all the way through. There's a crinkly plastic on the inside, which I don't know 100% the method of construction here, but you can hear it. And that's probably not the best quality hat. They do still have a pretty decent hat band and inner hat sweatband, and it does have the snap brim, and it has a pinch front crown. So this would be a fedora, but you can tell this is a lighter weight hat. It is not as heavy, and you can just tell that it's not made as well. And this is more of a fur felt material. A wool felt material than the luxurious. You can see the difference here. This is a Knox.
Yeah, that one even looks heavier. The green one just looks like you could be attacked by an elk and you'll be fine.
Yeah, Knox made really fantastic hats. And so this is a Knox hat next to the budget-friendly Adams hat. You can see that there's a slight difference. So fedoras come in all different styles of crowns on the top, and they come in all different sizes of hat brims. So typically your 50s fedora, though, has a little bit of a wider hat brim and can snap down in the front. And then other fedoras can be shorter. So, you know, there's different brim lengths to fit the style of person and the wearer. But I think that this is a pretty cool little thing to have. It's an Adams hat. And even though it's a budget hat, it's just a cool piece of, you know, hat history. So I was really excited to find this Adam hat box online. Now, what I find interesting about this is it does still have its cool little tissue paper that's but it has a top hat. Now, I don't know that this would have come in here originally or not, because I'm assuming when these were produced, and Adam Hats, as I mentioned earlier, was bought out by the Mills brothers or sold to the Mills brothers in 1955. And that's when they started making these. The Mills brothers did. I was able to find information on that. I don't think top hats, I mean, I'm sure in some formal settings they were used, but by then fedoras were really all the rage. And of course, still people were wearing Hamburgs, but probably not too many top hats or bowler hats. I'm sure they were sold, but I'm not 100% sure that this hat, just because of its style, I mean, top hats are classic and they're worn, you know, a lot, but I wouldn't have assumed that that hat would have been original to this box in 1955. That's just my little 2 cents there on that. And then I'll show you this hat here, which is a Knox hat. Now, Knox made a really good quality hats. Vintage Knox hats are very expensive, as well as Dobbs. And Knox was founded in 1838 by Charles Knox in New York. In 2009, unfortunately, they closed. But what's cool is I've got this Knox hat here, which is amazing quality. It is a rabbit fur, so it is really soft to the touch. It is just amazing, an awesome quality hat. And thanks to Patrick, I now have a matching mini hat box to go along with it. So I think it's kind of fun to have the hat boxes and then the hats too, the grown-up versions of this. Now this has all different styles, as I showed earlier, inside. So I don't know what would have originally come in here, but I just think that these are so cool. So any of these miniature hat boxes are really going to be something collectors are looking for, because it's kind of falls into 2 collecting areas. So you got people like me that love and wear hats every day, and they want hat memorabilia to go along with it, and they want kind of a hat history with vintage advertising and all that kind of stuff. And then, of course, you have people that just love advertising and salesman samples and promotional things. So they're always looking for things like these. And because these are cardboard, you can imagine that over time, they don't really survive. So these guys are going to be a little bit harder to find. And I'm sure, given the fact that they were gift cards, who knows if they were actually traded in, what the companies did with them. So when you find them, they are pretty cool and they can be valuable. So, I mean, they're not hundreds of dollars worth of valuable unless you find a Christmas version. If you find a Christmas version of any of these mini hat boxes, you have struck gold. I wish I had a picture, but the one that just sold on eBay went for $120, and it was a Christmas Dobbs hat box, miniature hat box like this. So unless you have the Christmas ones, these go for around $30 to $40. With the hat inside, without the hat, around $25 or so is my going rates that I've seen for these online. And of course, there's different styles of each of the companies. So this Knox one, there's a round version of the Knox. This one is the more unique shape from what I've seen. The Dobbs, there's different versions. This seems to be the more common Dobbs one. There is one that's like a mint green that I don't see come up for sale very often. I look for these on eBay quite often just to see what comes up. And then I don't see a ton of these Adams ones. This is the first one I've ever really seen come up for sale. And of course I bought it. So here it is in my collection. And then these round Stetson ones, you do see a lot. These guys come up for sale.
With the exception of the Christmas one. Sorry, I think my sound's going. With the exception of the Christmas one, what are you typically finding price-wise for the run-of-the-mill ones?
I find them anywhere from $25 to $40. And it depends again on the style and like how common they are. These Stetson ones I see for around like $20 you can pick up. But some of these Dobbs and Knox ones, they can go for more like $30 to $40. If you ever see these for a couple of dollars, they really are worth picking up because they seem to have a good sell-through rate on eBay. And of course, collectors seem to want these, whether they're into hats or they're just into collecting advertising. They do seem very popular, as well as some of these Knox or other hat advertisements. These vintage advertisements from like 1930, they seem to do pretty well as well on eBay. I've seen several sold for around $15 for each of these old advertisements. And I think that's what I paid for these. So people really do want this because these are a great way to track down and date hats. As I mentioned, Stetson, they've had so many hats made and so many different lines that it's almost a nightmare to date them. So when you find vintage hats like this Knox, and it's the Hallmark series as it's labeled inside, it may not have a date, but if you can find a vintage advertisement that features that hat, you can then suddenly date it. So those advertisements are valuable. And like Patrick said in the beginning, unless we could find other advertisements or salesman samples, it is sort of hard to figure out more about these. But that's going to spark a whole new research journey for me, is going on eBay, looking for ads simply just to see what else is out there about these miniature hat boxes.
Excellent. Well, if you close your eyes really quick, I'm going to put on the screen what I paid for yours. So I'll just say that I was below average in what I was able to find. So that was in the wild, though. That was at an antique shop, and I was able to get a really good price. But Tim is also asking, and this is a favorite question for shows like this, how do you display these? And I'm trying to remember when you showed some of the videos of your home, I'm trying to remember where these were located. So how are you displaying this collection?
That is a great question, Tim. So I just recently acquired my grandpa's bookcase that he built in the 40s, and he gave that to me, or grandma gave that to me, and it's in my bedroom. And I really had fun filling it up. And I had these previously in my closet next to my hats, but I think they are just so awesome on that bookcase. So that's where I display these. And then all of my hats I display in my bedroom, in my closet. You want to display your hats in a safe, cool environment where they don't get too hot so they don't shrink. And you want to make sure that you're keeping them out of light where the light might fade some of the colors. And you also want to make sure that they're kind of dust free. These couple of vintage hats that Louie has put her hair on, I will get that cool hat brush out and I'll give them a brushing. So that's how I take care of my hats. And it's better if you can store them in hat boxes. I do not have room for a million hat boxes. True hat collectors have all the boxes stacked up and they keep them safe. So if they bring out their summer hats, they'll put away their winter hats. Mine are all displayed on pegs. So I just have a peg that hangs them up, which is the safest way so that they're not getting crushed. You don't want to crush or misshape your hat. So holding the hat by the brim is always the best way. Storing them like this, if you don't have a hat box to store them in, will keep them safe. Like you could clip them by the brim. So you just want to do things like that to protect your hats. But that's how I display them in my home.
Now, one of the questions, I think we've caught up with the questions in the chat, and I hate to move away from the mini hats because they're too damn cool, but I want to go back. You had shown something really quickly and you mentioned it, and everyone was making mental notes of what your hat size is. So you are 7 1/8, but
Yep.
your head is more than 7 inches across. So how are sizes of hats calculated?
That is a good question, Patrick. And it's really confusing for people that start getting into the hat world because like 7 1/8, what is that? Well, I can't really say that I know what that number exactly means, but the best way to measure your head for hats is to use a tape measure like this and then use a conversion chart. So pretty much any company you're buying hats from, they have a conversion chart online, and most hats are measured in millimeters, which makes it a little confusing for us in the US. There are charts that will convert hat sizes for you. So if you measure it in inches, they'll convert it into millimeters, which then converts to that weird number like 7 1/8 or 7 1/4. So I'll show you on my head, and I've got crazy hat hair. But if you take this tape measure, you want to find the center part of your head that is the widest at the top, and then you can go around. And it's kind of hard to do with one hand, but you guys get the idea. So you go around and you measure it until you get to this point. You can measure it several times, and you want to kind of have it at a slope so that the fatter part of the back of your head is also included, and then kind of go up and measure it here. And then you pull it off. And if you look at this, it is a 22 in millimeters. So then you can go online and find 22 on a chart, and it will convert it for you, and it will tell you 7 1/8, and it will be about a medium size. And I do want to talk a little bit about that with hats. Hat sizes are confusing when they're just medium, small, and large. And your better hats, the best hats you can buy, are actually going to have a real size on them. So this vintage hat doesn't have it, but the Stetson does. So let me show you. Nope, this Stetson doesn't either. Where's this other Stetson? Come here. All right, this one has it. So most really good quality hats will have a tag that mentions the hat size. Hats that are more mass produced or made for the everyday person or a little bit less expensive will usually have their hats done by just small, medium, or large, or the worst is one size fits all. Stay away from those hats. They don't fit really anybody well. So if you want a proper fitting hat, measure your head and then find a company that does good measurements online and actually marks their hats. Now, the Stetson that I had that was vintage that didn't have the tag, it fell out. They do because they're older. When you find a certain hat size that works for you because you've measured your head and then you get a fitting hat, a more modern one, you can usually be safe with the vintage hats in that same size. So I'm a 7 1/8. I find that that works for me in almost all vintage hats. So Dobbs, I'm a 7 1/8. I'm a 7 1/8 in Knox hats, and I'm a 7 1/8 in vintage Stetson hats, which equivalence is equivalent to about a medium. If you are going the route that is small, medium, and large, which isn't the best, but it is out there. And Bruno hats, the way they do their hats, which is the modern company, they do unfortunately use just the medium size marker. But they do have a chart. So that's kind of nice, is even though it's marked medium in the hat, they have a chart that says 7 1/8 is a medium. So they're a little bit different in that they don't actually have a marking in their hats, but it's still good quality because they've got the chart, which really helps you get a good fitting. And of course, if you ever buy a vintage hat or any hat that's too large, you can get foam inserts and put them in your hat, and it will expand, make them a little bit smaller on your head. And most good quality hat companies will include that with their hats when you buy them. All Bruno hats come with them so that you can fit them to an exact perfect size, because you could be in between sizes. That does happen sometimes.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if they're just doing small, medium, and large, that would help you adjust it a little bit. So, okay, so that's fascinating. So it's just doing a conversion chart. Mine, I believe, is, well, it says 57, which I don't know what that means, but it also says 100% paper made in China. So I really don't think it's going to be used as a reference for anything. But hey, it's a hat, and I've got to try and look good when I'm on screen with Katie. So I don't have many, but they'll make some appearances. So that is, I think we'll pretty much wrap things up for the evening. I appreciate everyone joining in. This was actually really interesting. I love that collection. I think it's great that Tim and I both got you. We kind of doubled your collection size, like in 1 week. So everyone be on the lookout. Let Katie know if you find any. And if you find any information for people that watch this video later, if you find any information, please do share it with us. Comment on the video. Give us links that it would be interesting for us to fill in a little bit more. I mean, it's a fun subject to collect. And in some cases, they just look cool, and there's nothing wrong with collecting something just because it looks cool. But we like to educate too. So if we can find out more facts, those are always going to be fun to have. So appreciate everyone joining in. Katie, what do you got coming up on your channel the rest of the week and next week?
Well, I'm very excited about the collaboration that just went live. Patrick was a part of it. So we brought back the clear glass in 2022, and that collaboration is up on my channel. There's a link to the playlist with about 25 other collaborators. So if you haven't seen that yet, definitely go check it out. And then this Sunday, I am hosting Tales from the Triptych. So the Triptych will continue at 8 p.m. Eastern, and I'll be telling the tale of not only clocks, but mystery clocks. So I'm very excited about sharing mystery clocks with all of you guys, and that will be a lot of fun. So make sure you tune in on Sunday for that at 8 p.m. Eastern.
Fantastic. I really just have my sale coming up tomorrow night. I've still shifted to the late night slot. So Trusty's late night live sale will be Thursday night at 11 p.m. Eastern. It'll be a short one. So I've got that. And then I kind of have to figure out what I'm doing next. I think Nate will end up hosting the next Triptych, but we're scheduling the rest of the DuoDives, trying to reschedule some of the people that had to cancel. So I don't know what's coming up next week. Next DuoDive. Actually, no, we do know. Next DuoDive is yours.
Yes.
So a week from tonight, we'll be on Katie's channel, Vintage and Vinyl, at 9:30 p.m. Eastern. And who are you hosting next week?
Yes. So next week, we're going to have My Vintage is 1976. Nate from Instagram, he will be sharing his amazing collection of Pyrex and teaching us all about the wonderful world of Pyrex. So I'm really excited about having Nate on the show. So that will be fantastic at 9:30 p.m. Eastern on my channel this coming Wednesday.
There you go. So thanks everyone for joining. I hope you all enjoyed it, and make sure you follow Katie on Vintage and Vinyl and follow both of us on our Instagram channels. And we will talk to you again soon. Thanks for your time. Thanks for putting your trust in Trusty Huckster. Have a great night, everybody.